Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park. And let's actually talk about where this book came from, because this is actually a reread for you, right?
Yes, and the time I came across this book was very interesting because I was in the Philippines, and at the time I was going from bookstore to bookstore, whether they're a national bookstore or a thrift store, and I came across Happy Birthday or whatever in one of the small thrift stores that really didn't have a lot of customers, but it was filled with books, which is why I gravitated towards it. And the book was kind of just tucked in the back of one of the shelves, and I don't even know what about the book caught my eye, but I saw it, I pulled it out. The image of the book cover was very compelling because there's a person with flip-flops wearing a dress, and at their feet is this birthday cake that's smashed and the candles are all askew. So it was like interesting, and reading the back cover made me even more interested, and I didn't even realize how much of a good read it was going to be.
Right, and like the wording on the front, like the title and the author's name is all handwritten. So it's definitely a unique cover.
Right.
I don't know if I would have ever picked it up, but for what I've been getting out of it, I'm surprised from where it came.
For sure.
But also, this was a good purchase for you. I'm pretty sure you didn't pay that much for it, right?
No, it was a thrift store in the Philippines, so I'm pretty sure I paid $1 or even less than that.
Right. So, I've known a couple people that have vacationed recently, and some have come back from the Philippines. I know other people that have come back from Korea, and I think sometimes I hear stories of people getting I think it's called like the American tax.
Yes.
So what, for people that don't know, what the American tax is because as an American or as a foreign traveler, you may not speak the language nor know the cost of the transaction because of the difference in money and exchange value.
Right.
They tax you a little bit extra, and they make you pay a little bit more.
Speaking from the Filipinx perspective, Filipinos tend to think that U.S. Americans are rich. So if you speak English and if that's the language that you're starting from, once they hear that, they're like, oh, rich person. So they do add more to the cost, even though it sounds like you're bargaining, you're actually paying more. I'm not sure what it's like for people of other ethnicities, though, but I know for a fact that if you speak English, they're absolutely adding more.
Well, the other thing they do is they lure you. Like, these are the best hustlers ever. They'll tell you look pretty. Oh my gosh, your hair's so soft and shiny.
Right.
It's like, bro, I'm just trying to buy this pen. Like, what is happening right now?
Totally. Or for example, and I'm thinking again to like the marketplaces in the Philippines, when they are selling bags, they're going to point out like, oh, look at your shoes, it's gonna match this bag, and like try to match you up with your outfit. Yeah, so it's like that's their way of selling things.
So beware of the hustle. These are the best of the best.
Yes.
So beware of the hustle if you do go to these places, but also realize that you can find some pretty cool things in some uncommon and unexpected places.
But also, this is not a saying that you should hustle hard, because not to say that you shouldn't bargain, but know that, like, I'm speaking again from the Philippines perspective, they don't get a lot of commission. So yes, the bargaining in marketplaces is expected, but don't bargain too hard.
Also, what $1 means to us and $1 means carried over into what is it, pesos in the Philippines, it means so much more to them. So just pay the tax.
Right, exactly. What is $5 versus $4 to us?
Also, them holding your biceps and tell you you're so strong.
Yes.
What does that really mean to you? How much does that cost?
Right.
But, okay. So then let's go ahead and talk about our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is an organization called Asians for Mental Health, which started in 2019 and was founded by Jenny Wong, PhD, who is a licensed clinical psychologist and corporate speaker. Asians for Mental Health was created to help Asians feel seen, heard, and empowered in their journeys towards better mental health. And what I truly, truly, truly appreciate about this organization is that they created a directory that helps connect Asians with Asian therapists. And it's not a comprehensive directory. It was created and run by volunteers, Mike Chen, John Lee, Lin Kyung, and Craig Wen. In my personal experience, it helped me search for a mental health practitioner and allows me to know who is practicing in which states. So in Oregon, there are many. In California, there are many. And this is particularly focused in the United States. And if you are an Asian, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander therapist practicing in the United States, you can include yourself on the website if you'd like. And that website is asiansformentalhealth.com, and all of that is spelled out, asiansformentalhealth.com. Also, Dr. Jenny Wong wrote a book entitled Permission to Come Home, which recently celebrated its first book birthday, and I've heard a lot of good things, and I'm planning to pick it up. Maybe we'll talk about it in the podcast, we'll see. And you can also find them on Instagram, which is how I first found Asians for Mental Health, at the handle Asians for Mental Health.
Yeah. And that is our book club recommendation for the week.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are going into the second part of Happy Birthday or Whatever by Annie Choi.
Mm-hmm.
A little recap, Jamae.
Yes. We last read chapters 1 through 5, and we talked about these essays where we see Annie's family dynamics, which is a little rough, but also about her childhood, about having to give up all her stuffed animals and having to get straight A's and to study hard, while also figuring out how to keep her Korean language without losing her Americanness as well.
Mm-hmm. And so this week we are reading chapters 6 through 10. So this is the next 5 essays.
Mm-hmm.
And the first essay that we're reading is Period Piece.
In the essay Period Piece, we see that Annie navigates the complicated journey of her first menstruation, but does not quote-unquote bloom or get her period until the age of 17. Although she has a specific fantasy of what her first period would be like, her body's lateness, quote-unquote, makes fitting in with her friends difficult, especially when talking about her stance on pads versus tampons, searching for any bra that would fit, and discovering physical attraction to boys.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is where I need to turn on my DJ voice and go, this one's going out to all the ladies.
Wow.
This essay is for the women out there, because this was the first essay for me that I didn't feel like I could truly connect with her. I still really liked the story, but this was the first one I felt like I was kind of on the bench rather than right in the game with her.
And to go back a little bit, this is also for anybody with a body with ovaries.
Right. So what did you think?
I thought it was so necessary to have this essay in the book, because considering that this book was published in 2007, periods, menstruation, women's bodies, bodies with ovaries were not spoken about openly. Periods are still unmentionable, and period products were still unmentionable with all the woo-woo about it. But in addition to that, I felt connected because her mention of Always Ultra with wings, I'm like, yes, that was my favorite back in the day. That was my go-to. I love those. Don't use those anymore, but still, this is not sponsored. Mm-hmm. Also, I feel like this need to connect to womanhood or this need to feel grown up, I could relate to that. Like when people started wearing bras and started having curvier figures. The interesting thing is that I was an early bloomer, super early. Like I got my period at 9 and I wasn't prepared. So instead of waiting, I was one of the ones who started early. I had my growth spurt first. I was maturing. I was the height at 10 that I am now. So I was gargantuan.
I thought that there were pieces in here that, although I didn't know what it felt like for her at the time, the way that she explained it helped me connect with her in some way. So little bits like when she's in the locker room and just kind of feeling ashamed of her body, always feeling like an outcast because the way that she had to talk to her friends, kind of because everyone else was in a different stage than she was.
Right.
I thought that part translated really well. And even though it's not the same story for me, she told a really great story of being able to show us how she felt more than just the situation.
Right. And I think it was awesome that she had a friend like Christy, who, even though Christy was an early bloomer like myself, she didn't outcast Annie. She was kind of like Annie's connect into the world without making it seem like having to have your period was the goal. It was just like they were just friends. They were on the same level. Annie wasn't less than, Christy wasn't more than. They were just friends sharing about life. Right.
It was also that Christy started getting the eyes of boys. And when we think about the stupid movies that we've seen, and it's always that girl who then becomes both mean and better than,
like
and
Queen Bee.
Just too cool for the person that isn't quite grown up or hasn't hit their period or their puberty yet.
Right.
So it is really cool that Christy was she wasn't judging Annie by her quote unquote womanness or when she turned.
Right. I just feel bad that Annie lost Christy when Christy moved high schools. I'm like, man, I feel like high school is such a pivotal point in a person's life, especially a young person's life.
Right.
I'm like, and like, again, the fact that Annie went through all of high school, still not getting her period and still feeling awkward about it was a little like, oh man, I feel for you.
But I'm curious what you thought about the ending, because there's this piece at the end where she goes up to her mother and she tells her mom that, I'm not pregnant. She tells her mother, I finally got my period, and her mom's like watching TV, and it's such a side project for her mom. And what Annie had originally imagined was that she was walking around a lake, there were ducks, she was in a white dress.
All right, her fantasy was that it would be like a big, very dramatic moment for her.
Right, but what she got, I thought, was maybe not what she originally wanted, but was still something that satisfied her as a reward. Because her mom talked about how she would then go to Costco and then buy her the pads and then the chocolate, and then that seemed to be enough for Annie to feel like, okay, like this is kind of what I wanted from my mom. Maybe just the acknowledgement piece.
When I read the ending, I felt like she wasn't quite satisfied. Like it was not necessarily a complete downer, but her mom definitely was nonchalant, like, oh, you got it? Cool. We're going to get chocolate. We're going to get pads. And it felt like that wasn't... Not only was it not what she was expecting, but it wasn't fulfilling, which is what I wrote in my notes. The non-celebration of periods is kind of a bummer. Not only for Annie, but in general, because when I got my period, it was the same thing. It was like, oh, you got your period, let's get you changed. It wasn't celebrated. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, you have entered womanhood, leveled up. So even though so much emphasis is put on it, at least in my experience as a woman presenting figure, a lot of emphasis is on when you have your menstruation, now you're a grown up. But once it happens, that's like, you got it. Cool. Shrug.
I guess so. So for me, not knowing the period aspect of it, but knowing the growing up in a Korean family aspect, I thought that was a sign that her mother cared.
Oh, yeah.
Because for anything else, it was just like she brushes it off, right? So it seemed like so little, but I think in the end, knowing what it feels like to be raised by this kind of a parent, it's like, oh yeah, that's her going out of her way.
Totally.
And it means more than I think the words might perceive.
Absolutely. I totally get that, and I think that's fair. I didn't see that when I was reading it, but I totally see it now that we're talking about it.
I also felt like her mom was a strong figure in this, because when Annie would come back to her mom, it does seem like her mom is brushing her off, being like, oh yeah, I got my period late, why are you worrying about it? And kind of was just pushing her back and not really acknowledging the fact that she was having these worries and concerns. But I think that was in a way to, I don't know if consciously help Annie, but it was to try to help her understand that this wasn't a big deal in terms of her feeling like an outcast. Not the fact that she wasn't entering womanhood, but the fact that she wasn't different from anyone else still. And then when her mom did see Annie needing something like the bra, it was fairly immediate that she took, I mean, it was embarrassing, but fairly immediate that she took her to the store to go get this stuff.
Yes, there was that support, like, this is something that you want, even though I see that you don't need it, let's go get it, because it'll make you feel better, or at least you think it'll make you feel better.
Right.
So I just wanted to point out, like, and this is like within the essay but not about the essay, just like in the last episode, there are some outdated terms in these essays, and in this essay in particular, the fact that they use the word retarded to describe Annie's aunt when they were growing up was kind of, I don't know, I was like, was this not removed from vocabulary in 2007, the time of publication? But it was like, I'm not sure, but I wanted to point it out so that we're aware of it for those of you who haven't read the book.
Okay, so let's go on to our next essay. One day, Annie's mom brings home a 3-foot wide and over 3 foot tall photo of Pope John Paul II. But this is only the beginning of a barrage of religious tchotchkes that enter the household. From Jesus candles to plates with depictions of biblical scenes, Annie works to defend her home from an oversaturation of her mother's keepsakes. Eventually, the 1994 Northridge earthquake and her parents' move to a smaller space finally gives Annie the upper hand to not only shed the various religious figurines, but also to get revenge for the Dodgers-themed koala that was taken from her many years ago.
How did you feel reading this essay?
I thought it was hilarious. This is exactly what happens to good homes with terrible images.
I mean, this is what happens to overly religious homes. Especially those, and I'm speaking from experience, from those in the Christian/Catholic realm.
But do you think that these figurines, these other things that her mom brings in, is a symbolism of her religiousness, or do you think it's the way that she's dealing with the social situation?
I think it's more, so it's less about social situation. I think it started off as a symbol of her devoutness to her religion, because she starts with the photo of Pope John Paul II.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like the one thing for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until a little later where it was figurines. And these figurines started off as statuettes, as like actual religious reverence.
Mm-hmm.
Then when it morphed into like having the footprints story in the bathroom,
mm-hmm.
and a cross with a coat hook, when they started to become more tchotchke, more keepsakey or decor,
mm-hmm.
instead of religious acknowledgement,
mm-hmm.
I think that was less about a social aspect and more of a, this is a part of my life now. And so because it's a part of my life, it is going to be everywhere in my life.
So, on page 98,
mm-hmm.
I'm going to read you a line.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, "For a long time, church was mostly a social outlet for my parents,
mm-hmm.
especially my mother. They opened up their house for Bible study groups and fundraising meetings, during which they gossiped about church members and their children. Parentheses, drugs, marriage, Harvard, and parentheses, instead of discussing the Bible." Now, the reason I bring that up
mm-hmm.
is I don't think it was the religiousness of this at all. Now, when Annie goes and describes the photo,
mm-hmm.
she is very intent on describing every little bit, right? It's not
mm-hmm.
just Pope Paul John II in his weird, creepy hands open pose.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the frame, it's
mm-hmm.
the lacing, it's every little bit of it.
Mm.
Coming from also a religious family
mm-hmm.
who went to church all the time,
mm-hmm.
a lot of this was so ingrained in the socialness of it.
Mm.
So her mom bringing her friends in, she needed something to show her friends, like, hey, I am the most religious one here. Look how beautiful this is, hanging in my house. The footprint poem, or the
mm-hmm.
little phrasing,
mm-hmm.
I guarantee you it was in English, which I'm pretty sure her mom couldn't even read. And the reason I know that is because I had one in my bathroom too. It was right over the potpourri that my parents had. But I think that this was much more of a show of, look at all these things that I have that I collected from these places, and I got these figurines from here.
That's fair.
Rather than just the, look at how religious we are.
Totally. I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it was less about the religious paraphernalia. And I mean, like, that in itself is bringing flashbacks. It is bringing me back to other homes that I visited. My home in particular wasn't filled,
mm-hmm.
but there were things.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus candle,
mm-hmm.
crosses,
mm-hmm.
photos of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really the religiousness of it, but the amount. The more Annie talked about what was in the home and what her mother was bringing in, I was like, oh no, this feels like a hoarder situation.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about flashbacks with the hoarding, my flashbacks is with the start of this essay, when Annie is complaining about how her parents always talk to her when she's on the toilet. And that happens so often. I don't know how parents time this so well. Because they're in the opposite side of the house. Like, there's no way they hear the door. Sometimes they're outside and they're, like, trimming hedges or something. And then, like, I will walk into the bathroom and they're, like, yelling my name. And I'm trying to yell back. But I have the barrier of a door.
Right.
I am in a very vulnerable position where I don't want to be yelling.
Right.
And somehow they know this as soon as I sit down. And they're like, why aren't you coming? It's like, I just sat. This journey takes a while. Please let me go through my processes.
Yes, oh my gosh.
I also thought it was really hilarious when she mentioned that when she was going to get the surprise, which was the picture eventually being unraveled of Pope John Paul II,
Mm-hmm.
She was actually expecting, like, SAT prep books and vocabulary flashcards,
mm-hmm.
because that's exactly what happened to me as a kid. Those were my presents, which was very exciting.
Wow.
Yeah. But in the end of this essay, with all these tchotchkes and everything, eventually Annie gets her revenge.
Yes, the way her mom got rid of her stuffed animals.
Yep.
Annie kind of flipped that on her mom and started getting rid of the religious little figurines and whatever was broken from the earthquake.
And this is the introduction of the pettiness of Korean people. And we'll also talk about this later on when we eventually read Crying in H Mart, because Michelle Zauner has a great story of pettiness within her family. But I've always thought that my pettiness came from an individual being. Now I understand that it's hereditary, and I feel very seen by the fact that she also has this pettiness. Because she comes out and mentions the Dodgers-themed koala within all of this.
Yes, so it's a callback.
Yes.
What I appreciate, though, is that she did this in front of her mom instead of behind her mom's back.
Right. She was putting things away. Her mom would say no, and she's like, I'm still putting it away.
Right, because it's broken. We're going to throw this away. Yeah. You have more of these. We're going to throw this one away.
Yes. From there, it takes a little bit of a turn with our next essay. So the next essay is called The Best Diet. Yes.
In chapter 8, as Annie explores newfound independence in her first semester of college, she's bombarded by multiple morning calls from her mother for the most mundane conversations. However, one day, when calling her mom back, her father picks up on the other end and shares the news that her mother has been battling cancer for over 3 months. The story tells of a powerful woman maintaining her composure through life-threatening diagnoses and a daughter frantically trying to take part in helping her mother.
And this was the essay for me that made me realize that this wasn't a random assortment of stories. I think everything that's built up to this point made us realize what her mother meant to her.
Right.
I think the good and the bad showed the full relationship that Annie and her mother had together. I definitely choked up a little bit, like as I was reading this and hearing the struggle that Annie had, the impatience of wanting to just be home with her mom as she went through these really debilitating scenarios, just one after another.
Right, and it's not just cancer that she's going through. Right. Spoilers for those who haven't read it yet. Right. It wasn't just cancer, she had an infection. Then after that, going home from the infection, she got into a car accident where she was the only one affected. So many things happening while Annie's in college, and her parents kept telling her, don't come here. You're going to make your mom worry more if you're here. We want you to do well, get good grades, finish the semester.
And this is one of those instances where I saw my own blessings in life, where just like Annie, going to college for me was such a liberating experience of being able to finally be independent and be on my own.
Totally.
I was able to live that independence, and I mean, my parents always called me and always told me to come home, so there was still that. But I got to live my independence and not have to worry about something so big and life-changing like this. So it did help me count my blessings.
Totally.
But when I read this book, it also made me realize, like, the aspect of life being so limited and life being so short. One thing that it made me think of was this one stand-up that Aziz Ansari had, where he talked about the time spent with parents. And just to kind of shorten it all out, Aziz is not living with his parents currently, so he goes back home and he sees them for holidays and things like that, but maybe once, maybe twice a year. And as he's going through this whole story of his visit at home, which usually involves him going to see friends, doing this and that, so maybe spending a dinner or something with his parents, and then so what he goes on to do is he calculates the time that he spends with his parents, and we're talking about like the physical hours and how much of that he's actually paying attention, like not on his phone. Then he takes that time, which are merely hours, and he's like, well, if I do this once a year and I multiply it by, let's say, a life expectancy of another 40 years, then it really shows you a physical value of how long we have with our parents. And I think that thought has always stayed in my mind. And so when I was reading the story, that was definitely something that hit me really hard is, yes, like, I'm still away from my parents. I still have a growing fear of my parents aging and becoming older, and as you become older, all these different things can happen to you.
Yeah.
And so this one was, there are funny scenes within it, which is just so grateful to break up the seriousness of it.
To give a little bit of lightness.
Right. But I really felt the struggle of having to watch from the sideline and having to call in and hoping that things were okay.
Yeah.
My parents, especially my mom, was always the type to get surgeries without me knowing as well. Like, she had a bunch of, like, small little things. And, like, my mom really was someone who didn't want us to worry about her. So she did exactly what Annie's mom did and just kind of hid the situation and just handled it.
Right. I mean, very different. But my mom, when she gets surgeries, it's very similar in that she doesn't want us to worry about her. And after she gets surgeries, she's like back up and running and like, no, mom, you need to rest. But that's not how many mothers are built. Many mothers are like, don't worry, I've got this. Go on with your life.
Yeah. And I think, like, your mom has it in so many different ways. But from this story, I could just see that very direct connection. I don't know if it's a Korean person thing or Korean mom thing, but even her dad says it at one point in this story where he says, your mom is really strong. And this is the way that her dad is trying to keep Annie in college at this point.
Yeah.
He's like, your mom's really strong. She's stronger than I am. And I mean, clearly you can see, like, her mom had a bunch of stuff happening and her mom was still joking.
Right.
And it was clearly a way of deflecting the situation. But I think for Annie, who's also always sarcastic and always humorous, it had to be that point of comfort, that home base that she was able to return to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so from there, we finally get back to more lighthearted. Yes, because, I don't know, for me that one was heavy. But the next one is Chapter 9, and it's called Vegetarian Enough. Korean food revolves heavily around meat and seafood products, and Annie's family is quick to remind her of that as she discovers her new vegetarian diet. Through endless questioning, Annie persists with her vegetarianism and almost picks up a new recruit on the way.
This was my story. Except, so with Annie, her vegetarian origin story is more like the fact that it was suggested to her and she just wanted to rebel as a young person. There wasn't any moral backing. There wasn't any health backing. It was just, I'm gonna do this.
I mean, to be fair, there was a moral backing from that author. She just didn't read it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so like when her mom questions her and is like, so why are you doing this? And she talks about the author, and her mom's like, well, you don't even know that author. Do you know that person? It's like, yeah, there really is no foundation besides I want to do this, and it gets to the point of just inertia. But that's not my story. What I related to was how her mom says, how can you be Korean without meat? And I remember when I started my vegetarian journey, everyone asked me, how can you be Filipino without meat?
Right.
And like, absolutely, so many dishes, almost all dishes have some form of meat, whether it's pork, beef, chicken, fish. It's all in there. There are very, very, very few things that you can eat without meat. And like, those dishes are usually like poor people food, which is like rice, toyo, or soy sauce, and oil. And that's it. But that's not necessarily a dish. It's just what you eat because that's all you have.
So I thought this was really funny because, when we started dating, you were absolutely strictly vegetarian.
Right, just all vegetables.
All vegetables, tofu, things. And I think on our second date was when I realized this is not going to work. Our first date, I ate vegetarian, maybe vegan. I don't remember anymore because I was too enamored with you.
Wow.
But by our second date, I remember specifically asking you, are you okay with me eating meat? Like, if it's on the side?
Yeah, and I was like, absolutely. I'm not going to make anyone follow me just because I'm doing something that's right for me.
Because that's a red flag.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a scene on page 135, which I thought was really funny. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it pretty much talks about how, I think it was our uncle that said, but if you can't see the meat, you can't see the meat, so it doesn't count. And then this part made me think about this one place. So in California, there's this little shop. It's not little anymore. It's a pretty big shop. But it's called Porto's. And Porto's has these bakery items, a lot of really delicious items. Yes. A lot of them don't have meat because it's like sweet and savory goods.
Right.
But there's this one very specific item that everyone goes to Porto's for, and it's their potato balls. It's a mashed potato, pretty much, with a substance on the inside, and then it's a fried breading on the outside, and they deep fry the whole thing.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, the thing on the inside is actually ground beef, and there's meat in it with carrots, and I think spices for sure, but some other stuff. So your aunt, who is very sweet in a lot of ways.
Yes.
She takes you there, and she wants to make sure that you eat well.
Right, because all Filipinos want to feed you.
Yes. And so she buys this thing for you, and then I think you ask...
No, I didn't ask. What my aunt said, and I'm quoting verbatim, you can eat this. To me, that meant this is vegetarian, so... Here you go.
And to be fair, if her words were, you can eat this, was this the aunt that's a nurse?
Yes.
So if we're talking medically, your physical body can both chew and swallow this item, and your body can digest it.
I guess.
So she fed this to you, and you completely thought that this thing didn't have meat in it.
Right, because she knows my vegetarian journey. I was... very trusting.
And then we have brought this up with your mom and your aunt, and both of them have kind of been like, which is not the response.
Which is because it's like, well, you didn't die and you ate it.
Yeah, so. And you enjoyed it too. They now have a vegetarian option there,
right,
for the thingy,
right,
for the potato ball. Also,
that happened many years ago, and I only found out that there was meat in it when you and I, when Steven and I went to Porto's together, and I brought up potato balls, and you said, but there's meat in it.
Yeah, you can't eat this.
And I was like, oh, wait, hold up, my life. I felt like my life was crashing around me.
There was another thing where we first started dating, where so this is when you were strictly vegetarian, and now you're willing to eat a little bit more seafood things, still not meat, but more seafoody things. And so I asked you very strictly if one of your most favorite, most important foods that you love had some type of fish product in it, would you want me to tell you? Do you remember the answer that you gave me?
Initially, I said yes.
And then I said, are you sure?
And then I took it back and said no.
Do you know what that food item is now?
Is it kimchi?
No. It's pad thai. It has fish sauce in it. And you would have been so devastated. So the part where I connected in this is there's a little bit of scene in page 131 where Annie she's in a conversation about her mom, trying to convince her mom that her grandmother shouldn't be eating meat either because she's Buddhist.
Right.
And she says this little joke. But the quote that I connect with Annie is, I laughed at my own joke. Clever, clever girl. And I'm like, man, I say that all the time. Because sometimes people don't laugh at my joke, and I'm like, still clever.
Nice.
Yes. But I thought this essay was very lighthearted. It talked about a very big part of her, because in Korean culture, Filipino culture, most Asian cultures really, food is the sign of love. It's
Right.
you go somewhere, you bring food. You want to take care of someone, you give them that food.
Right.
So
To gather and to celebrate, there's food. To mourn and grieve, there's food.
right. So her vegetarianism truly is, and in these cultures feel like a limitation in some ways, because you are expected to eat meat, and you're actually not even expected to eat meat. You're just expected to eat the food items that are on that plate.
Right. Anything that's served, you need to eat it.
Because it's a sign of respect. It's a
Right.
sign that you understand how much care went into this.
Right.
So I can see how heavy this burden of vegetarianism may have been for her when she was questioned by her entire family.
Right.
But I also liked it because it just felt very light and sweet.
Right.
But there's also a scene that we're going to now get into where she faces the battle of keeping her vegetarianism, and that goes into chapter 10.
The last chapter we read this week in chapter 10 is titled The Devil Moisturizes. Here, Annie and her mom combine forces to tackle the true matriarch of the family, her paternal grandmother. While dodging judgmental stares and incisive comments, Annie hopes to slide into her grandmother's good graces by attempting a traditional bow as a child and later as an adult coercing a bite of a fish into her stomach. Despite displeasing her grandmother with the failed bow, Annie seemed to have gotten a semblance of approval from ingesting the chewy, salty fish.
And this is where the food scene comes back.
Yes.
This is also where I'm starting to more understand that these aren't random essays. Like, these all play little bits and parts of telling Annie Choi's story.
Right. And, like, also revealing how much a team she and her mother really are. Like, even though they fight so much, they're actually looking out for each other.
Right. And we also get this story after the cancer story, the best diet story.
Right.
And I think it just means so much more when you see that struggle that they had together, both as a child when her mom is sitting her down and forcing her to do things. Her mom is taking away these little dolls and things from her. And he's then fighting back with that. And so it all just builds and builds and builds. And like, now they're fighting the master boss. They're fighting the Bowser of the family.
Yes, this reminded me, like, her paternal grandmother reminded me of my maternal grandfather in that nothing pleased my grandfather. My grandfather always had something cutting to say. Many of us avoided him. And I think something that was different that stood out to me was the smell.
I know that smell. It's so distinctive. It's so bad. So when I used to go to Korea, it's not anything hurtful. Like, it doesn't feel like a spite. Like, you know, some smells you're like, you're doing that on purpose. Like, you go into a high school locker room, it's like, boy, like, clean these stuff out. Like, you're doing this on purpose. But so it's nothing bad, but it's like you would go meet an old person, because we used to live in the countryside where my extended family still lives in the countryside. So I'd walk out and everyone says hi to everybody. And so I'd have these old harmonies, which are like our grandmothers. And they'd come out, and then like, it is like, I don't even know how to explain it. It's like medication and fish and I don't know. It's like years of suffering. Like, it's a lot of different things that come into that smell. So it's strong and powerful and really don't want to smell it. I didn't think it was that bad. Like, I didn't think it was like an evil thing, I guess.
Absolutely. Like, I get that it's probably like age. Like, while reading this, I was thinking of my grandfather's smell, my grandmother's smell. Yeah, they all smell differently, but I couldn't relate to whatever putrid smell that Annie was inhaling. So that's why I was like trying to figure out what it was. Is it just like the fermentation of food, maybe?
It's just like I think it's their mouth is rotting. I honestly don't know. When we go to Korea, we'll go smell some breaths.
Oh, no. I don't know. I'm very sensitive to smells, which is why I was a little alarmed. Because I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from, and I'm also like, I have, my imagination is so strong that if I were to fully try to think about the smell, I'm pretty sure my brain will make me think I'm smelling it.
So that's not the only bad thing about Annie's grandmother. The other thing is that Annie's grandmother plays a small role in this. It's kind of the preparation to go see her, right? Like,
right.
There is that little bit where her mom is teaching Annie to bow and do this whole thing. And the reason why they're doing this is because Annie's family is the first one to leave Korea for America. And so Annie and her brother are the signs or the symbols of what it looks like to be raised in an American family, which her grandmother was already against.
Right. And Mike and Annie were the only grandchildren born in the United States.
Right. So I understand that feeling to need to fit in. I think it was the same scenario for me and my brother, because my mom, and usually we're within my family, we're closer to my mom's side as an extended family. So my mom was the only one, and still to this day is the only one that has left Korea to come to America. And so me and my brother are the only ones out of all the cousins that are American. And I'm actually the only one in my family, out of all my family, to actually be born in America. Everyone else was born in Korea. So when we go back, I think there was this big burden to feel like we were trying to prove ourselves by showing that we could speak Korean well, but I still always had an accent. But I do know the bow that Annie struggles with, because we used to practice that at home all the time. So it is a very traditional thing that is kind of hard to do, and it's pretty tiring. Never did it in a dress, though.
Have you done it in a hanbok?
So no, I don't even know if I've ever... Like, I've worn it as a kid and, like, a baby, but I don't know if I've ever worn a hanbok, like, as an adult. I don't think I've had a need to. That's why I'm American. But yeah, so, I mean, the story shows a lot of the culture of what it's like to have that true matriarchy, like the grandmother sitting at the top. Everyone's trying to impress her, and I think each family has a little bit of that. Yeah.
In the end scene, when Annie and her mother are visiting her grandmother in Seoul, they're presented with a meal of side dishes and fish. And her grandmother points out that Annie hasn't eaten any of the fish. Now, we are told by the descriptions that her grandmother isn't a good cook to begin with. And so the fact that her grandmother is pointedly trying to force her to eat this fish, like, kind of scared me.
But also, we have to remember that before this scene happens, it was the bow scene where Annie fell in front of the entire family.
True.
So Annie is sitting on this feeling of devastation, and the fact that she probably feels like she needs to climb to her grandmother's good graces again.
Right. Even though this has been about 16 years since that failed bow.
Right.
That she needs to prove herself to make up for not honoring her on her 70th birthday.
Right. Because if we calculate interest and we put 16 years with that point of embarrassment, talking about a lot of embarrassment.
True. So
back to the fish.
Absolutely. So I don't remember this part of the scene. I thought she was going to evade her grandmother, but while reading it, knowing that she had to find a way to prove herself, I was wondering how she was going to prove herself. And the fact that she took a piece and put it in her mouth, I was like, wow.
I mean, it took a long time, though.
Totally.
She was definitely avoiding it.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, I'm pretty sure the buildup of all these years of displeasing her grandmother was like, no, we gotta do this. And on page 160, how she said that she needed to drown out the fishy, sour aftertaste of respect.
But not to mention, so she had that, but do you remember what her mom did to help Annie?
Right, she was trying to eat the fish and trying to say, "Oh, there's not a lot."
Right, so she like quickly like grabbed the rest of the fish because she knew that Annie didn't want to eat it.
Right.
And then what happened at the end when Annie was trying to wash her mouth out of this sour fishy kind of taste, her mom was doing the same thing. So it's not like there are certain foods where we're like, okay, this is like you grow up with it, so it tastes this way, and so it's a little funky.
Right.
But this is not one of those. This was just bad food.
Right, yeah. And I thought it was like, because this seemed to satisfy Annie's grandmother felt compelled to offer to cook more.
Yeah. That's not good.
Right, and it was like, yes, it helped Annie reach her goal of approval, but it also opened a gateway to, so she likes what I cook, so I'm going to continue to show her, like we said, show her more love through my food. Yeah.
Annie's gonna be real skinny. Yeah, I did like chapter 10. I think it showed that beautiful bond between Annie and her mom, going from learning the bow, her mom being like, you need to practice the bow more, Annie being like, no, I don't, and then later being like, I should have practiced the bow more. And then even, into this end scene where her mom is helping her tackle the fish and the connection with her grandmother, really, because I'm sure her mother and herself, as she was marrying Annie's father, had to go through the same process of feeling accepted by this lady who wasn't accepting much.
Right.
Yeah, so I really like this story as well.
Totally.
All right, so we are gonna finish up this book in our next read. So the next read is gonna be page 161 through 239, which is the end of our book, and this one's only 3 essays.
Yes, chapters 11 through 13, and the titles of those essays are "Fool Who Play Cool," "Rules of Engagement," and "New Year's Games." What are your predictions, just based on the titles?
So, understanding that all my predictions were pretty much wrong the last time, Fool Who Play Cool, I feel like, is probably going to be something with her friends where she does something embarrassing or something like that. Rules of Engagement, I feel like, is her story of possibly being engaged or maybe trying to marry someone. And then New Year's Games, I don't know. I feel like there's a big party thing. We have a game in Korean that's called Yutnori, which is like this stick game, which is really fun. So I feel like that's going to make an appearance. But what do you feel like?
So, based on what we've read so far, and knowing that there are several callbacks and circles in her essays that bind them together, I feel that Fool Who Play Cool has something to do, and again, I know I've read these before, but I don't remember full essays, so I'm predicting that Fool Who Play Cool is going to be about clothes, because we had that situation where her mom was wearing really nice clothes and she was wearing hand-me-downs. So I'm thinking that this is her foray into trying to look cool. Rules of Engagement, similarly, I feel like there must be some kind of dating scenario, whether it's by her choice or her mom setting her up. And New Year's Games, I'm thinking that because the book starts with not having a party, that New Year's Games is going to be about a party that doesn't end well.
I can see that.
Yeah.
All right, so for anyone that wants to chat in and chime in with anything that we're reading, how can people reach us?
You can find us on Instagram, send us DMs while they're still open, and comment on our posts at Asian Book Club Pod, POD, or you can email us your thoughts, your suggestions at asianbookclubpod, POD, @gmail.com.
And we also have a website, that's asianbookclubpod.com. Also, make sure to follow and subscribe, and we really appreciate all those who have already done so. But make sure to read or don't, whatever you prefer for the next time.
Yep.
We'll see you in a week, but I hope you come back next time.
Bye.